Hi, I'm Paul Westcott with L2, and today we're going to take a deep dive into the Virginia voter file, specifically looking at early voting and how we at L2 come up with our party affiliation model. There's been a lot of questions since we started posting data in the past few weeks with early return data for the 2023 general election. And today, November 2nd, we're going to look at the very latest data that we have, and we're going to look at how we come up with our party modeling and where it's good, where it might be questionable, and how you can use it to help interpret the election, because that's the biggest question. How useful and important is this information? So, what we're looking at now is a map of all voters in the Commonwealth of Virginia, around 5.7 million individuals. What L2 does across the country, and we are a national nonpartisan voter file provider, we work with campaigns, associations, advocacy groups, educational institutions, as well as government officials. And what we do is we provide a clean, enhanced version of these data that come from publicly available sources. So we take in the state file, and in Virginia, it's extraordinarily limited. What you're dealing with is name, address. You have primary ballot selection, which we're going to talk about here in a second, whether they pulled a Republican or Democratic ballot. You've got age information. And some other limited details, of course, the district information, things like that. So what we then do is we look at, in order to determine party affiliation, is we first look at the primary ballot selection, and you can see I've got this open here on the right-hand side, on the right-hand panel. You can see that what we have is in the 2023 June primary, we had around 321,000 Democrats pull a ballot and around 145,000 Republicans pulled a ballot. The most important part of this is this only makes up about 8% of the voting population. So you say, okay, well, we've got around 300,000 Democrats and around 145,000 Republicans. Well, that's really not going to cut it in terms of being able to get this kind of coverage across the state of Republicans and Democrats, which you can see is pretty robust. It's covering a good portion of the state. So we have to look back at other primary elections, and L2 has a deep inventory. We've been around for over 50 years. And you can see we go back to 2016 here, when about 25% of voters in the current file actually showed up to the primary, or actually around 26%, and around 837,000 Republicans and 652,000 Democrats. Now, even though this is a good indicator, it's still not perfect, but the idea is around 90+% of the time, according to the best research we've seen on it, if you pull a Democratic ballot or a Republican ballot, you are affiliated or most closely affiliated with that party. So we're going to take that as a great indicator, or at least a strong indicator, that this person is a Democrat or Republican. However, with only about 26% in one of the biggest elections in the last decade, having shown up, how do we get to the other numbers? How do we get to, the fill rate that we do with millions of voters tagged as Republican, Democrat, or nonpartisan? We then have to do some demographic modeling of those independents. We're going to look at age, income, race and ethnicity. We're going to look at gender. All these different demographic factors that our researchers and data scientists internally look at, and they say, well, these individuals, because of where they live and who they are and some parts of their background, are either a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent. Now, this, of course, is likely Republican, Democrat, or independent. This is not known information. So you have to take it with a grain of salt. So now we're going to take a look at the latest early return data, and we're going to look at some of those demographics. So first thing is, when you scroll down here, and just so you know, this is a dynamic platform. You can actually zoom into any given area and take a look into sort of some of the deep, turnout. We'll look at Richmond here for a second. And if we say clicked on early return data here on the right-hand side, you can see that statewide, and it's still going to be a statewide count, around 613,000 people have shown up and turned in their ballot. And you can see the map quickly change here within the Richmond area. I'll zoom back out so you can see the whole state. And you can see the state kind of looks similar to how it does in the other application, because right now we're looking at around 10%, almost 11% of the state's population. One of the things we don't often showcase in some of the images, the still images we put online, are the return ballot status. So this is we actually include, and I'll deselect voted early or absentee for a second, you can see how many people have been sent a ballot, meaning it's been sent to their home. Early in person, that's how they voted. Returned by mail, so that's how they voted. So returned by mail or versus in person. Rejected, which is a very small number and usually goes through a process called curing, which means if somebody is rejected, their ballot's rejected, it typically means they voted by mail and then also in person or in person and then tried to send in a ballot by mail. The ballot gets rejected, but once it's cured, this number typically of around 8,600 goes down to zero. And then, of course, you have requested. These are individuals who have requested a ballot, but you have not yet received it, which is around 282, with the vast majority of voters in the state not participating in early voting. So it's important to remember that this is only a portion of voters, that there are still going to be a large number of people who show up on election day. Depending on how those people show up, how campaigning is done, there's all kinds of things that go into this. But looking at early return data and saying it's entirely predictive of turnout is kind of tough, because different campaigns, different organizations, they're pushing early voting versus election day voting. So you're going to see kind of a little bit of a lopsided approach depending on how the campaign has done it. As we've seen over the past several years, Republicans tend to show up a little bit later in early voting, if at all, and typically show up on election day. We've seen the numbers rise in Virginia for Republicans, and Democrats have stayed pretty consistent. Now, of course, the argument is that Republicans are eating into their election day or cannibalizing their election day turnout. Democrats are saying, or Republicans are saying about Democrats, well, their numbers are lower and we're looking better for early return data. Therefore, we're also going to make the big push on election day. So there's a lot of posturing on both sides of it. And while we are seeing among the current group, and I will go up to individual demographics here, we'll go to political party. You can see that we have around 59% Democrat, 35% Republican, and about 5% nonpartisan. But what's interesting about this is among the Republican number, it is certainly higher than it's been in past cycles at this point. So we actually have looked at some of that historical data, done the comparisons, and Republicans are doing better. Now, whether that means they'll be able to overcome the 60% turnout or so from Democrats statewide is to be seen. Let's also remember that this year we're focusing on district by district elections versus statewide counts. Also very important. Taking a look at some of the other demographics for the November 2nd turnout, we've got male versus female. I'm also going to open up the broad ethnic categories as these all load. We'll open up age as well, age range. And let's take a look at some of the other demographics that we have. We have noticed that women have far outpaced men, 55 to 44%. Age does come with the state voter file, so you can see that we've got around 75% or so are over the age of 55, around 54% are over the age of 65, so it is an older electorate. It is whiter. However, you have around 13% of African Americans. Now, if I deselect early voting here, and I'm just going to pull this out, and we look at the total population, what you can see here is that whites make up around 70% of the total voting population, 63% of the total voting population, whereas African Americans make up 15%. So it looks like whites are over-indexing or voting more than non-whites within the state, within voters who are showing up. So it's around 71% or so white and 13% likely African American, 3% Hispanic, and 3% East and South Asian. And then one of the other characterizations, or one of the other things we have in here is going to be our urbanicity, as we call it, or urban, suburban, rural classifications. And you can see that you see suburban makes up almost half of the voters that have shown up so far. Around 22.6% urban and 27% rural. And if I, again, deselect voted earlier absentee, and this is what our team is doing all day, they're just taking a look at these data and then doing some comparisons. Okay, remember we saw half were suburban, so suburban is outpacing the rural or urban areas in terms of the early turnout data. So that's where we're getting a lot of this information from. It is based on zip code analysis done by Consumer Partners. This is done throughout the political space. We're doing this in all 50 states for 2024. We're doing it in about 15 states this year, looking at some of the early return data. Is it a good indicator? Sure. Is it the ultimate indicator? Absolutely not. You have to wait until election day to be able to see that come out. But this is just a little background on how we do things. And if you have any other questions or want to see any specific district or area, please just let our team know via Twitter, and we'll do our very best to accommodate. Thank you so much.